and then I will share the screen. Okay, now we're ready to begin. So today's presentation, as most of you, all of you know, is the dual loyalty revealed by the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashana. I'd like to begin with an introduction. Everyone probably has heard, or you certainly saw in the blurb for this presentation, that Rosh Hashana is the Jewish New Year. It's coming another week and a half, 2 weeks. And indeed, Rosh Hashana in Hebrew, Rosh means head, beginning, and Shana means year. So it's the head of the year, the beginning of the year. Indeed, it's the Jewish New Year. And when we're coming to think about this subject of New Year and New Year's, let's go back in time. Well, primitive man, many thousands of years ago, before we have kings, before we have kingdoms, before we even have agriculture, we probably don't have a concept of year. But certainly man sees the seasons passing, turning, the cycle of the seasons, and he may ask himself, which season is first? What's the beginning of the seasons? Now, of course, there's no objective answer to that because the cycles go on and on and on and on. There's really no objective beginning and end. But man may decide that one of the seasons strikes him as the beginning of something. It depends how he conceptualizes nature. It may be the fall is the beginning. It may be the spring is the beginning. And then later in human history, when we get into agriculture, well, then there's another cycle that's overlaid over the purely natural cycle, and that's the agricultural cycle. When we plow and when we plant, when we harvest, and man at that point could have had different thoughts about when he's going to designate the new year. I shouldn't say the new year, but the beginning of the seasons. Is there a beginning to the agricultural cycle? Again, it's something subjective. There's no objective answer to that. When's the beginning of the agricultural cycle? But man may give a certain answer to that depending on his experiences. So until now, we've talked about different types of natural, of universal understandings of when things begin again. And whatever understandings man would come to, they apply to all men in that geographical area. Everyone who experiences nature and agriculture in the same fashion may give the same beginning time in his or her understanding. And then later in time, we have the need to create the concept of years, not just the beginning of a natural cycle or an agricultural cycle, but a concept of year. That's when we have kings, when we have contracts, and we have loans, and we have taxes. So we have to know how much time has passed, when the loan is due, how many years of back taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And man develops the concept of year. Now, once we have the concept of year, we can begin to ask, and men do begin to ask, so when does the year begin? There has to be some time. But again, it's pretty arbitrary. It's subjective. There's no real beginning to a year. It's a human construct, this year thing. Now, it may be based on the revolutions of the planets, but when does that begin? It goes on constantly. And I think there are two different answers that can be given. In other words, man can work on two different foundations of when the year begins. In addition to the two foundations I'm about to say, of course, he can always rely on the agricultural and the natural things we've talked about until now. But in addition to that, there's human activity. And when we look to human activity for setting a beginning of the year, we can look at human history. In other words, activity in the past, or we can look at human activity in the present, and what's happening in my life today. If we look at history, we can say, okay, we're going to count time. The years are going to begin when the state was founded, or when a religious figure was born or died. That's in the past, and we know systems that work on that basis. For example, Christianity and the modern Gregorian calendar based on Jesus' life. It's something that happened in the past, and it's meaningful to most of the world today. That's when we begin our civil year. And there are other nations that count from the beginning of their existence, when the nation was founded. But in addition to looking at history, you can also look at present time. We can set the years, the beginning of the year, on the foundation of what happens in our life today. For example, most Americans talk about the beginning of the school year, when the kids go back to school every year. The beginning is August, the beginning of September. Others talk at the beginning of the tax year in April. That's when in our life there's a new beginning. So there's lots of different ways to think about the beginning of the year. And now we come to Judaism. And we're going to see that Judaism doesn't have just one new year, it has actually two. And it's pretty interesting. We're going to see that the new year that Jews are about to celebrate in another week and a half is not the new year, it's rather one of 4 new years. We're going to talk only about 2 today. There's actually 2 that we won't talk about. So this brings us to the sources that some of you printed out, some of you have on your screen on your own. I put them on the screen right here. We're going to look at a number of different biblical verses and try and flesh out what is this thing about the Jewish New Year? When is it actually? How many of them there are? And the first sources we're going to look at are in the book of Exodus, in the Jewish Torah, the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, the beginning of the Hebrew scripture, what Christians often call the Old Testament. We're in the book of Exodus here, in chapter 12. And the story, the context, is the Jewish, or should say the Israelite, period of slavery in Egypt. They've been enslaved for many hundreds of years. God has promised that they're going to go out from slavery to freedom. There's going to be an exodus. Moses has been appointed. There have been 9 plagues at this point. And then on the eve of the 10th plague, we read at the beginning of chapter 12 of Exodus the following. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Mitzrayim, the land of Egypt, saying, you know what, I'm going to make that bigger for you. Maybe that some of you can't see it. Did it get bigger for you?
A little.
Did it get a little bit? Okay, so that's the best I can do now. And the Lord spoke to Moses. You see my bracket there at the beginning of chapter 12, last third of the page. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be to you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you, etc. Now, first let's see those words in English, to you. This month shall be to you. It's in the plural. In the you in Hebrew can be in the singular, in the plural. Here it's in the plural. It's talking about the whole Israelite people, the whole Jewish people. This month shall be for you, for the Israelites, the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Again, that emphasis of to you, the indirect pronoun. And the sense we get is that there may be a pre-existing beginning of the months. The Egyptians may have one, the Israelites may have one, the Canaanites may have one, but now we're being told that for you, this people, this Jewish people about to be born from the womb of Egypt is going to have its own beginning, its own first month. And that makes perfect sense. They're about to become a people. And we're being told that that historical event of becoming a people is going to mark the beginning of their calendar, the first month. Now, what month is it? Well, we know the story of the plagues in the book of Exodus. It's the springtime. We talked in a few chapters earlier in Exodus about the fact that I think it was the 6th or the 7th plague was the barad, was the hail coming down on the barley in the fields. In other words, it's the beginning of the barley harvest a few chapters ago. That's like the month of March, approximately. It's the spring. And here we know that the Israelites left Egypt in approximately the month of April, what we in the Hebrew calendar call Nisan. It later says, I'm about to read the next verse, on the 10th day of this month. So now it's the beginning of the month. It's the month of Nisan, what is called in the Jewish calendar Nisan. That's when things are happening. And this month, when they're going to now take a sacrifice on the 10th of the month, then it later says they're going to kill this sheep and they're going to splash the blood on the doorpost, and they're going to eat bitter herbs, and they're going to eat it together with unleavened bread, with matzah. That's the ceremony of Passover. And that's happening on the 10th day, and then the 14th day, and the 15th day of this month of Nisan. They're about to go, the day after the Passover, to go out really to freedom, and this marks the beginning of a new epoch for the Jewish people, and that's why it is the first month for you. Not for the Egyptians and not for the Canaanites and not for the Americans, but for the Jews. This celebrates the beginning of their history as a people. Okay, that's the first thing we wanted to say, the first point. We're going to move now to another source. And that source is in the book of Exodus, chapter 23. Again, I hope you can see it on the screen. When I move things, I guess it moves on your screen as well. Here we are in the book of Leviticus, in Hebrew Vayikra, chapter 23. And there is here a list of Jewish holidays in the book of Leviticus. We're going to read in chapter 23, verse 4 and 5 that I have in brackets. These are the feasts of the Lord, holy gatherings, which you shall proclaim in their seasons. On the 14th day of the first month towards evening is the Lord's Passover. Why did I read that? Just to show you that when Jewish scripture talks about the holiday of Passover, and it tells you when it is it? It is in the first month. Because we just saw in the previous verses that the month that Passover falls in is now going to be designated the first month. And indeed, the Torah follows its own directives, and it calls the month of Nisan in the spring, like approximately April, it calls it the first month. And then I'll show you another page, this also from the same chapter in the book of Leviticus, also chapter 23. And in this list of holidays, we're now going to read in verse 26, just to give you an example. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, also on the 10th day of this 7th month, there shall be a day of atonement. That's in Hebrew the Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement. And it's in the month called the 7th month. Why is it the 7th month? Because it's 7 months from the month in which the holiday of Passover fell. That was the first month, and first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. The 7th month is what we call in Jewish tradition today the month of Tishrei. It's the month that Jews are going to begin celebrating another week and a half. The month of Tishrei is the 7th month. Wait a second. If the holiday of the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, is in the 7th month, on the 10th day of that month, then the holiday that we Jews call Rosh Hashana, that we're going to celebrate another week, falls in the same month. It falls the first day of the month discussed here, the 7th month. What did we just discover? That the day that Jews call Rosh Hashana, the beginning of the year, is not in the first month. It's in the 7th month. And of course, we understand that the first month is in the spring, when we celebrated Passover 6 months ago. And then half a year later, the exact middle of the year, the beginning of the 7th month, that's the day of Rosh Hashanah. 10 days later, and the 10th of the month is Yom Kippur. These two holidays, Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, they don't fall in the first month. They fall in the 7th month. So now we're really confused. I hope everyone's confused. Raise your thumb if you're confused, right? But I'm not fooling you. I'm not pulling the wool over your eyes. Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the Jewish year, falls in the 7th month. That's confusing. Okay. But we got ahead of ourselves. The point was just to show that we're counting the months from the spring, from Passover, from the month that the scripture calls the first month for you, for the Jewish people. Okay, and you can just go on a few verses down in the same piece of paper I have on the sheet. In chapter 23, verse 33 and 34, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying the 15th day of the 7th month shall be the Feast of Booths. That's what Christians call tabernacles, in Hebrew, Sukkot. It's going to be in another approximately 3.5 weeks, in that same 7th month, the month of Tishrei. So you see, we have all these holidays, the 1st of the month, and the 10th of the month, and the 15th of the month, that are going to fall another week and a half, 2, 3, and they're all in the month that is the 7th month, but it's somehow the month that Jews celebrate its beginning as Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. Strange indeed. Okay, we have all that information under our belts, and we're moving to the next page in this photocopy. This is the book of Exodus, chapter 23 in the book of Exodus, and we are changing gears a little bit. Does anyone, by the way, want to point something out or ask something at this point? You can unmute yourself if you want. I see Barbie. So You're welcome to make a comment, ask, question, add.
Okay, so we're referring to the head of the year and New Year. And you said the actual Hebrew translation of Rosh is head. So where did we ever change from calling, because it could be the head of the year without being the beginning of the year. When did we ever make this transition from head to new or beginning?
That's simply a matter of my use of the English language, or our use of the English language. The Hebrew word Rosh means head and beginning. Head in the sense of the header, the header off, or the beginning of something. It's not head in the sense of, it's also head in this sense.
That's what I thought.
It's head in this sense, but it's also head in the sense of the head of something, the beginning of something. The word literally means beginning.
Okay, that helps a little. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone else? I don't think so. Okay, so we're going to go on. We're now, as you see on the screen, in Exodus chapter 23. And here we have verses 14, 15, and 16. I'm going to read in English. 3 times thou shalt keep a feast to me in the year. Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread. Thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days as I commanded thee, in the time appointed of the month Aviv. I'm sorry they didn't translate Aviv. Aviv means spring. And the holiday called here, the holiday of unleavened bread in Hebrew, matzah, is the same holiday that orally was called the holiday of Passover, of Pesach. It's the same thing. And that's the beginning of the list, I guess because it's at the beginning of the months, as we read earlier, that the holiday of Passover, of unleavened bread, is in the month, that's the first month, so it's the beginning of the list. And then it says, I'll read that verse again, 3 times, thou shalt keep a feast to me in the year, thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread, thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days as I commanded thee, the time appointed of the month of spring. And we indeed said earlier that that is the springtime. For in it thou didst come out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. In other words, those who come to the temple in Jerusalem are supposed to bring a gift to God, a gift to God. The next verse 16 says, and the feast of harvest, the first fruits of thy labors. That's the holiday that we called earlier booths, tabernacles, Sukkot. In this list, it's called the holiday of the ingathering, the Asif. I'm sorry, I got it mixed up. Sorry, I made a mistake. It's the holiday of the grain harvest, which is Shavuot, weeks. We didn't talk about that earlier. That's Shavuot, weeks, Pentecost. That's the first fruits of thy labors, which thou sown in the field, and the feast of ingathering. That's the third holiday, which is at the end of the year, when thou hast gathered in the labors of thy fruit. So the ingathering, that's the Asif. I'm sorry, I'm getting you guys confused. First, we had the holiday of unleavened bread. Then we had the first fruits of the labors. That's Katsir in Hebrew, the harvest, the grain harvest. That's Pentecost. That's Shavuot. And then the third one here is what was earlier called, when we did it 10 minutes ago, Sukkot. Here it's called the ingathering, the Asif, the gathering in. And what's important for us is that holiday of the Asif, of the ingathering, it says is at the end of the year. The end of the year. Now, when is that holiday that's the end of the year? We said in what we learned a few minutes ago that it's the 7th month. The month we're about to begin, another week and a half. It's the month that's in the fall. So here we learned that the fall is called the end of the year. That should be very confusing, because we all know that the year is a cycle. And whenever the beginning is, that's exactly when the end is. The end was one day before the beginning. If we've already learned that the beginning is in the spring, the end is also in the spring, right? If we just learned in Exodus 10 minutes ago that when the Jews celebrate the going out of Egypt, the Exodus, the beginning of the Jewish people, as the beginning of the year, then it must be that the end of the year is just one day before. Is also in the spring, just one day earlier. So how can our verse tell us now that this holiday of the ingathering, which is in the fall, we learned it's in the 7th month, the holiday of Sukkot, the holiday of Tabernacles, how could it be the end of the year? That's really confusing. Because if the end of the year is in the fall, then that means the beginning of the year is also in the fall. Because the beginning and the end are right there next to each other. It's a cycle. So what we found here is that Scripture contradicts itself. We found here that according to the Torah, the beginning is in the spring and the end is in the fall, and that's a contradiction. Again, if the beginning is in the spring, then the end is also in the spring. And if the end is in the fall, then the beginning is also in the fall. So we have one set of sources that says the beginning and end are in the spring, and here we just learned that the beginning and the end are in the fall. I just want to point out that you don't need my logic, which it's good logic, but you don't need my logic to tell you that the beginning and the end come together. I should really say the end of the beginning, because the Hebrew word here used for the end of the year is a word that has both meanings, beginning and end. I'll show you the word in Hebrew for those who know Hebrew. You can see here, I have put the cursor on it, the word is tzeit. Tzeit, letzet, which means to go out. And that word both means the end of something, but also means the coming forth of the sun, like when the sun comes out. The same word is used when comes out and comes in. Because again, when we're talking about the year, beginning and end, they're at the same point because it's a cycle. Again, the word was tzeit. We'll show that even better in another 1 minute when we see verses parallel to these later in the book of Exodus that use a different word than that word tzeit. So here we are again. I move now to Exodus 34, and we're going to read verses 17 and 18, and then 22 and 23. And these verses are exactly parallel, almost word for word for the verses with the verses we just read a few seconds ago. Another list again of 3 holidays. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, verse 17, shalt thou keep. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, as I commanded thee in the time of the month of Aviv, spring. For in the month of Aviv, spring, thou didst come out of Egypt, Mitzrayim, as we saw earlier. Then I'm skipping a few verses down to 22, where my bracket is, verse 22. And thou shalt observe the Feast of Weeks. That was earlier called the first, what was it called there? I forgot. That was called the harvest, the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, Shavuot. And then it says, and the Feast of Ingathering at the year's end. Ingathering, again, that's the holiday we called Sukkot, Tabernacles, Booths. And it says at the year's end, the same thing, that the fall is the end, but look at the word in Hebrew for the word end. I'm going to the Hebrew where my cursor is, and there it says, Tikufat Hashana. Tikufat Hashana. The word tikufah means turning. It's the turning of the year. Some of you who are Jewish and perhaps know what we do on the holiday of Simchat Torah, when we go around and around dancing with the Torah, we call that hakafot. Hakafot, going around. And this here is the same word, tikufah, and hakafah, the same word, the going around. So here you see explicitly that the fall month, the 7th month, is called the month of the turning. In other words, that's when the year ends and that's when the year begins. And it brings us back again to what we said earlier, that we have this tension, we have this contradiction, that in one place the Torah says the spring is the first month, and now in 2 sources we've seen that the fall is the beginning end of the year. We're going to stop again and leave it open to questions and comments and objections.
Rav,
Yes, Gilda.
how come the word sof is not used? End, sof.
I don't know, but perhaps the reason is for what I've been talking about, because we want a word that indicates not just end, but indicates the end and beginning together, the beginning and end together. And these two words that are used exactly have that sense.
I got it.
It's
Yeah.
not just the end, it's the cycling point. This point when the cycle begins again. The yearly cycle begins again.
So, Rav, here's a question for you also, because it is kind of interesting how we've got the spring and then we've got the fall, both of them being identified as the beginning. Might this not, as I understand it though, so much of scriptures together with combining different religious traditions and different religious narratives, would that simply be combining maybe a Levitical tradition and another tradition?
I hear. Thank you for the point. Thank you for the comment. I would say the following: that for me there are at least two different types of questions. One question is, where did it come from? A second question is, what does it mean? You're answering the question, where did it come from? And you're giving a possible, plausible answer. In the way I was trained, we concern ourselves very little with the question of where it comes from, but much more with the question of what it means. Sometimes what it means is connected to where it comes from, sometimes it's not. In this case, I'm not focusing, and I really don't know much about the question of where it comes from. I'm trying to answer the question of what could be the possible meaning of this scriptural text. And what text, I mean the 5 books of Moses, presenting us with two different answers to the same question, two different answers to the question, when does the year begin? And I'm going to claim in another few minutes that there's great religious significance, actually tremendous religious significance, overwhelming religious significance to there being two cycling points, two beginning and ending points. Okay.
Can I ask one more question? I just have a clarifying question. So then that means that Rosh Hashana is also the end of the year and the beginning of the year, and then Passover is the end of the year and the beginning of the year as well?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to have to explain now why there's 2 points like that, 2 ending beginning points. And for that, we're going to move to another text. This one is in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 11, verses 10, 11, and 12. Here we go. For the land into which thou goest to possess it is not as the land of Mitzrayim, the land of Egypt, from whence you came out, where thou didst sow thy seed and did water it with thy foot like a garden of vegetables. That's a reference to the fact that the Israelites in the desert, wandering for 40 years, about to enter the land of Israel, have come from Egypt. In Egypt, there's very little rain. What you have is water from the Nile. The Nile is always there, not at certain times. It doesn't come from the sky, it comes from the ground. It's flowing on the ground, and all you have to do to water your crops is to dig an irrigation ditch to take water from the Nile, and then use a water wheel with your feet to bring the water from the Nile to the ditch, and then it flows. Egypt is flat. Wherever you put the water, it spreads out. So all you have to do to have a beautiful vegetable garden in Egypt is to bring water from the Nile. And we're being told here that the land into which you're going, into which the Israelites are going, the land of Canaan, is not like Egypt. It's very, very different. How is it different? But the land, this is verse 11, but the land into which you go to possess it is a land of hills and valleys. Why is that important? Because water doesn't flow uphill. You can't use irrigation ditches in the land of Canaan, even if you had water at a certain point, because you can't get it to go uphill. You can get it to go downhill, but can't get it to go uphill, which means you can use irrigation only in 50% of the cases. What are you going to do? Well, the verse says, but the land into which you go to possess it is a land of hills and valleys and drinks water of the rain of heaven. There's no Nile in the land of Israel. There's very few springs. There's very little. There's almost no rivers. There's the Yarkon near Tel Aviv, and then there's the Jordan River. Most of the land is hills and valleys without any springs, without any rivers. Where do you get water from? From the rains. So agriculture is very different in the land of Canaan, which is the land of Israel, than the land of Egypt. Then it goes on to say, a land, in other words, the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, is a land which the Lord thy God cares for. The eyes of the Lord thy God are always upon it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And if you know Hebrew and you look at the Hebrew, what is this expression, the beginning of the year? I'll put my cursor there. It says May, from Reshit Hashana. Reshit Hashana. That word Reshit is Rosh, just has a tough one letter at the end. This is the only mention of Rosh Hashana in the whole Torah, in the whole 5 books of Moses, in the whole Pentateuch. Again, where my cursor is, Reshit Hashana. Now the question is, can we figure out from these verses when this Rosh Hashana, when this Reshit Hashana, when this beginning of the year is? Can we figure it out? The answer is yes, we can figure it out. You know why? Because anyone who lives in the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, knows that the rains do not fall all year round. There's a rainy season and there is a dry season. It doesn't rain in April. It doesn't rain in May. It doesn't rain in June or July and August. It sometimes rains in September, usually begins in October. The rainy season begins in the fall. Again, the summer is dry. It rains in the fall and in the winter.
Oh, okay, let me think about it.
I'm gonna mute, okay, muted there. So knowing that there's a cycle of rain in the land of Israel, which the farmers are very much dependent upon, let's go back to the verses we're reading now and see if we can figure out when this beginning of the year is. So I'm going to read again from verse 11. But the land into which you go to possess it, the top of the page, is a land of hills and valleys and drinks water of the rain of heaven, right? The context is rain here. A land which the Lord thy God cares for. What does it mean cares for? Cares for to bring you the rain. The eyes of the Lord thy God are always upon it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So if it's talking about rain, God is interested in the land. His eyes are upon it to bring you the rain from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. I think it's clear from here that when is the beginning of the year? The beginning of the year is the beginning of the rainy season. When it begins raining, that's what's called here the beginning of the year. When God's care is again brought forth upon the earth, as expressed by the rain, by giving the thirsty earth something to drink and become green again, that's what's called the beginning of the, and that makes perfect sense. And let me just explain to you. In the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, before modern times, I'd say up until 1950, well, this matter was so felt, because when March and April come, the cisterns that collect the rainwater are full, and the land is green. Everything is wet. Everything is moist. Things are growing. And then comes April. Things are still green, but there hasn't been rain for a month. And then May and June, things are green, but the cisterns are down to 60%. And then comes the summer months, June and July. It's hot out, and everything is dry and parched. The ground is turning brown. The ground seems to be dying. All the foliage is gone. It's withered. It's dead. And then August, heat, parched earth, dry, nothing's green, nothing's growing, and the cisterns are down to 20%. You come the beginning of September and you're scraping the last drops of water out of the cistern. You don't know how you'll feed your fruit trees. You don't give water to your fruit trees. You don't know where your own water for you and your kids will come from in another few weeks. And you feel that the earth and even all life is about to die. And then the rains come. And within a few days, you see everything turns green. That's the way it really is. And there's finally something to drink again. And you feel the beginning. Life again comes forth from the earth. And in the understanding of man and woman who live in that context, this is absolutely in the fall, the beginning of the rainy season. This is the beginning of the year. Life is born again. The earth gives birth again. It's a new cycle. And then the cycle goes on, the whole rainy season, everything is alive. And then you come to the spring and the rains stop. The cycle begins again. And when we get to August again, that's the end and you're waiting for the new beginning. So it's very clear to us why the fall is the beginning. It's clear to us, therefore, why the holiday of Sukkot, the holiday of tabernacles, that we saw earlier, is called to be at the turning point of the year. Because that month, the 7th month, the month that we call Tishrei, September, October, is exactly when the year dies and the year is born again. And at this point, we can very well understand what these two new years of the Jewish people are. I'm about to now put everything together in a certain sense. The new year of the fall that we've been talking about right now is the new year of the natural cycle, of the agricultural cycle. It's the new year experienced by man qua man. Anyone who lives on the ground in the Middle East, whether it's Canaan, Israel, whether it's Syria, whether it's Lebanon, whether it's Jordan, that person knows very well that the earth begins dying June, July, August. It feels like it's coming to an end. And then in September, October, with the rains, everything comes alive again. The year ends and the year begins. And when it begins, it's not just that there's water and there's greenery outside and everything comes to life. Also, that's the time you begin plowing and then planting and beginning your agricultural cycle. So it's clear that the new year of the fall, the new year that we Jews call Rosh Hashana, that we celebrate at the beginning of the year, is the universal new year. It's a new year of nature, the new year of agriculture, the new year that any person who lives in the land, whether he's Jew or Christian or Muslim or Sikh or Buddhist, whatever it might be, if you live in this part of the land in the Middle East, you know that Rosh Hashanah, the new year, is in the fall. On the other hand, what about that new year that we Jews celebrate in the spring with the holiday of Passover, which you said is the first month? What type of new year is that? It's not a universal new year. It's not a natural new year. It's not an agricultural new year. It is a Jewish new year. It celebrates the birth of the Jewish people. So to put that all together, it means that Rosh Hashanah, the holiday that Jews are celebrating in another week and a half, is not the Jewish New Year. It's the universal human New Year of the Middle East. When is the Jewish New Year? It's in the spring when the Jewish people celebrate their birth as a people. So here's the big point of our lesson today, that there are two New Years because the Jew is supposed to experience himself or herself on two levels. You experience yourself on the Jewish level, the level of Jewish particularity, the level of Jewish peoplehood, the level of Jewish nationality. When we remember our history, when we're born as a people, as a particular, separate people. That's the Jewish New Year. What happens in the fall, what we call Rosh Hashanah, that's not the Jewish New Year. It's the universal human New Year of the Middle East that Jews celebrate. But we assume in ancient times, Canaanites also celebrated it. And the people of the Ugaritic kingdom also celebrated. Anyone in this area of the world would celebrate the fall as a new year. So the point is meant to be that the Jewish scripture and Jewish tradition has the Jew living on two levels. He is or she is a human being, a member of the human community, of the universal community, of the natural community. And we celebrate ourselves as human beings born into a new year on Rosh Hashana in the fall. And that has nothing to do with Jewish particularism, Jewish chosenness, nothing to do with Jews in particularity. When the Jews celebrate themselves as being born as a nation? In the spring, at Passover time, in the month we call the first Jewish month. Now, this is the reason, the matter that the fall is the universal new year in Jewish tradition. That's why rabbinic tradition, Jewish tradition, calls Rosh Hashanah the birth of the planet, the birth of the world. Many of the liturgical poems we sing Rosh Hashanah talk about Rosh Hashanah as the anniversary, the celebration of the creation of the world. Why? It's obvious, because if you live in the Middle East, you feel that in the fall, the earth is born again. When the rains come and everything turns green and there's again life and hope. So if I am living 3,000 years ago in the Middle East and the rains fall every year in the fall and I feel that's the beginning of the year, then if I extrapolate back thousands of years or millions of years, if the year begins every year in the fall, then that must be when the world was created. The beginning back then was in the fall. And so Jewish tradition says that while in the spring we celebrate the birth of the Jewish people, in the fall we celebrate the birth of the world, the birth of humanity. So to say it again, the particular Jewish New Year is in the spring, but the universal Jewish New Year, the celebration of humanity, is in the fall. Gilda.
Rav, wouldn't it make more sense to celebrate the birth of the Jewish people when we were given the Torah, Simchat Torah?
Well,
I mean, just logically, wouldn't that make sense?
the answer is no.
Okay.
Because we became a people even before we got the Torah. We became a people before we got our distinctive way of life. Simply going out of the womb of Egypt made us different than them. Later, 50 days later, we received our Constitution, but we are who we are even before the Constitution. We left Egypt. We became a separate people. For example, the American people became a people, let's say, at the Revolution, when we won the war, not when we adopted the Constitution. That was years later. Please, any comments, questions, points, objections? Yes.
Well,
Laura.
I just wrote in the comments that, and this is something I've thought before, that this is the central dynamic contradiction that has always defined Judaism between the God of Israel and the God of humanity.
Exactly, exactly. And now I want to talk a lot about that. Just want to finish up one little thread, tie one little thread, and then we'll get to the larger meaning of everything that we're talking about that Morris already opened the door to, which is this. I just want to point out that the natural, universal, agricultural New Year of the fall, by definition, can't be one day, because there's no clear beginning and end when the rains begin. Sometimes it's September 20th, and sometimes it's September 25th, and sometimes it's August 15th. It's a season. And the truth is that the universal New Year that Jews celebrate is not one day, it's 22 days. Where did I get that from? Remember that we saw a few minutes ago that the season of booths, of tabernacles, of Sukkot is called the cycling, the circling of the year, the end and the beginning of the year. Well, that holiday of Sukkot has 7 days. So why did I say 22 days? Because the first day of the month that Sukkot falls in, is what we call Rosh Hashana, the first of that month of Tishrei. And what we call Rosh Hashana is not the day of the New Year, it's the first day of the 22-day New Year. The whole month is the New Year from the first of the month until the end of the holiday of Tabernacles, which is on the 22nd of the month. That's all the season of the ending and the beginning. And indeed, in Jewish tradition, it's not just that the day we call Rosh Hashanah, the first of the month, is the beginning of the year. Also in the holiday of Sukkot, 15 days and 22 days later, we have traditions that continue the celebration of the beginning of the year. Many traditions. A lot of the traditions of the holiday of Sukkot mimic the traditions of Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the year, because again, the point is that the beginning of the year is not one day, it's at least 22 days. It's a season. Because you can't put your finger exactly in the beginning of the end when we're talking about natural cycles. You can give a specific day when you're talking about historical cycles. When you're talking about historical beginning, like the Jewish New Year back in the spring, that's a particular day. That's the 14th and 15th of the month when the people were born. But in the fall, it's a season. Okay.
Question.
Yes.
When you were talking about the creation of the people, wouldn't that actually have been, wouldn't that have come much earlier? Because the Jewish people would have been identified as a special people even before coming into Egypt.
Yeah, there's something to that, absolutely. But we say that we were a distinctive family before we came to Egypt. We were 12 clans, but when do we actually call ourselves a distinct people? That's from the moment of the Exodus from Egypt. I understand your point, but
Sure.
It is what it is.
Okay, no, that's
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
Okay, so now at this point, we're going to move from scriptural exegesis to philosophy and theology and ideology and politics. And Morris already opened the gate for that. I'm going to open the gate on my side by reading a sentence from a very important book that everyone should read. This is the book. Can you see it? Not in God's Name, by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who was the chief rabbi of England for many years. Rabbi Sacks, this book just came out 5 years ago, and this book gives voice to many things that I've taught and thought for decades. He says them much better than I can say them. So I'm just going to read one sentence here, which is pretty similar to what Morris said 10 minutes ago. He writes as follows. He writes that one of Judaism's most singular features is the following: its distinction between the universality of God as creator and sovereign of the universe and the particularity of the covenant, first with Abraham, then with Moses and the Israelites. So in other words, Rabbi Sacks is saying that one of the most important features of Judaism is the distinction between the universal and the particular. God is universal, he's creator and sovereign, and then there's the particularity of the covenant with Abraham, Moses, and the Israelites. In other words, the Jew is always supposed to have a dual understanding, a dual identity. It's not simple. It's not straightforward. There are two New Years, meaning there are two truths. One truth is that God created the world. The world is one. We're all connected. We're all children of God. We're all made in God's image. We're all universally valuable, and we're all the same. And that Jews celebrate on Rosh Hashana in the fall, when we celebrate the universal New Year that celebrates nature, celebrates the globe, the world, humanity, the creation of the world, the creation of man. That's the time of universality. And the Jew must never lose sight of the fact that humanity is one, that we're all created equal, we're all the same, we're all in God's image, we all are universally valuable. But that's not the end of it. There's something else. There's also what Rabbi Sachs calls the particularity of the covenant. The Jews have a particularity. We have our own relationship with God, different than the relationship of other nations with God. That's just us. That's Jewish history. That's Jewish chosenness. That's Jewish particularity. That's the new beginning of the spring when the Jewish people were born. What that means is that every Jew should see himself or herself as, number one, a human being, number two, a Jew. You should not see yourself as just a human being and not a Jew, and you should not just see yourself as just a Jew and not a human being. As much as you feel the universality of all mankind, which is very important, you should also feel the brotherhood of the Jewish people. And on the other hand, as much as you feel the brotherhood of the Jewish people, you should never lose sight of the fact that all human beings are part of one earth created by one God, all created in God's image. You have to hold that duality and never lose sight of it. If you swerve, that's not the right word. If you weigh down the balance to one side or to the other side, you've made a bit of a mistake. You have to hold both sides of the stick together. And we know that throughout Jewish history and also today, there are some Jews who go in one direction and some Jews in the other direction. The suggestion that Rabbi Sachs is making, that I think the Torah is making, is don't go in this direction or that direction, but go in both directions at the same time. If you lose one or the other, the balance has been upset. And this has far-reaching implications. Far-reaching implications. Let me give a little bit more background. Another indicator of this duality is the fact that 99% of the Old Testament talks about the Jewish people, but not 100%. 1% talks about the world. What do I mean? I mean the first 11 verses of the Torah, the creation of the world. All men are created in God's image. And then the flood and the Tower of Babel. That's all before the creation of the Jewish people. So why is it there? It's there because the Jewish people is not the only important thing to Jews. Humanity is also important. The sense that we're not just Jews, we're also human beings. We have a humanity that we cannot ever, ever forget. And that humanity is the first 11 chapters of the Bible. In other words, it comes first. And indeed, Rabbi Sachs says again and again and again, and this is found in Jewish tradition in many places, that universality, humanity, that all human beings are created in God's image comes first. It's prior. It comes before your sense of yourself as a Jew. You cannot, it's not proper to feel yourself as a Jew until you first feel yourself as a member of the family of human beings. Now that family of human beings is expressed in the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis, the beginning of Jewish scripture, with the concept of covenant, the concept of Brit. It's called Brit Noach, the covenant that God made with Noah. And it says explicitly that God made a covenant with Noah before there's such a thing as a Jewish people, which means that Judaism recognizes God's covenant with the whole world. The whole world. Now later, God makes a covenant with only the Jewish people. That's called great Sinai, the covenant of Sinai, when we got the Torah. But that doesn't erase and doesn't overpower, doesn't overshadow the covenant with the whole world. And you know what? Jews are part of the covenant with the whole world. It's not that God's covenant with the world is just for them and Jews have their own separate covenant. No, Jews are part of the universal covenant and they're part of the particular covenant. So again, the Jew should never ever lose sight of the fact that he's part of a larger picture. And rabbinic tradition explicates and fleshes out that Noahide covenant, the covenant with Noah, the covenant with all of humanity. And we Jews say in our tradition that God gave 7 universal commandments to all of humanity. We call them the 7 Noahide laws of morality. They are not to commit idolatry, not to commit murder, not to commit rape and adultery, not to commit theft, that's number 4, blasphemy is 5, cruelty to animals is 6, and 7 is the commandment to live in a society that set up a court, a legal system of police and of courts and of justice. Those 7 commandments are part of what we Jews call universal human morality, all based on the idea of the divine image in every human being, man and woman, no matter what color, what race, or what religion. And only after that covenant, that basic universal covenant, comes the particular particular Jewish relationship with God. And that is all symbolized and all distilled into tradition in this idea of 2 Jewish New Years. The New Year in the spring of Passover and the New Year in the fall, that's the 22 days from Rosh Hashana to the end of the holiday of Tabernacles of Sukkot. We're always remembering that Jews, as Jews, are part of both covenants of both worlds. We're both Jewish and we are also human beings. Okay. There's a lot more to say, but I want to stop for a minute and see again if we want to have a discussion of any sort.
Can I ask a question about this?
Of course.
So this is, the discussion is really fascinating, and I really appreciate you going through the scriptures and bringing these things out. And so I guess the question is, from your perspective, or from the perspective of Jewish tradition, why do you think God would have this both universal and particular covenant, one for all of humanity and one for just like a chosen section of humanity? If you could speak to that.
I'm really happy you asked that. That was going to be the next subtopic that we're going to talk about. Why? So, but I'll wait for that. See if anyone else wants to make a question or a comment before I go into that. I'm looking at my screen to see if there's any. No? Okay. I'm going to stop the screen sharing so it's easier to see each other. Okay. So, I will tell you what Rabbi Sachs suggests in answer to Andrew's point. Rabbi Sachs says that we need both the universal and the particular. Had we only had the particular, then we would be saying that human beings are tribes. Let me say that more clearly, that human beings are divided into groups with no commonality, whether you call them tribes or religions or nations or ethnic groups. If there's only that, and there's no sense of universal human brotherhood, then what you have is tribe eats tribe, nation eats nation. You have violence, you have a sense of exclusivity, that my tribe is better than your tribe. My tribe is the only true tribe. Your tribe is not for real. You're fake. You don't exist. My group at the expense of your group. That's can't be. We need universality. We need a sense of human brotherhood, that we're all the same. We're all related. We're all responsible for one another. But then you might ask, well, why not have only universality? Why not have everyone being brothers and sisters, and there's no tribes, there's no particularity, there's no nations, there's no ethnic groups, there's no differences. Why not? Well, the answers might be as follows. Number one, we just see that that's the reality of our lives. People divide themselves into groups. People need a family, a tribe, a nation. It's not enough to be a human being. It doesn't give us enough meaning. We feel commonality, affinity with a certain group, tribe, religion, culture, nation, and that gives us meaning to our lives. We need that. We just need it. Can you imagine such a situation in which we're all the same and there's no differences, there's no particularities, all people are the same, there's no families, there's no religions, there's no cultures, there's no races? It would be boring, it would be meaningless. It wouldn't give us a way to identify ourselves, to feel that we're special, that we have meaning in our lives. But more than that, Rabbi Sachs has another point, which is that if there's a sense that we're all the same, then imperialism flows from that. If there's a sense that we're all the same, then it's natural to want everyone else to adopt my truth. Because there's universal truth, so my truth is the only truth. Rabbi Sachs believes that had there not been particularism, but rather only universalism, that would lead us to the war for universalism, the battle to make everyone else like me, everyone else see my truth, everyone is to be the same. There would be a war against particularities. There would be a war to make everyone the same. And I would say that Rabbi Sachs, in saying that, is involved in a polemic against Islam and against Christianity. His claim is that the sense that there's only one truth, because we're all the same, we're all humanity, we're all brothers and sisters, sounds very beautiful, but if it's not tempered and weighed on the other side of the scale by a particularism that allows for differences among peoples, allows for different identities and different truths, then it becomes imperialistic and creates the sense that we want to make everyone else like we are, just like we are. So Rabbi Sachs's understanding is, and I buy into this myself, and I think this is a good understanding of what the Torah is saying, is that we need the balance between universality and particularity. And to go deeper into this balance, universality is justice. It's equality. Particularity is individuality and love. I have to watch out and make sure there's justice for all human beings. But who do I love? I love my family. I love my people, whether it's my nation, my religion. So there's distinction on the one hand, particularity, love, special ties that bind. That's the in-group. And on the other hand, there's the universality of human brotherhood, which is justice, which is equality, but it's not love, claims Rabbi Sachs. And we're trying to balance these two. And the claim is that that balance is the Jewish message for the world and the hope for humanity. And I believe, and now I'm going into the last 15 minutes of the presentation, at least the way I understand the work of Roots, the work of Shorashim, the work of Judur, the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation, is exactly everything we said for the past hour and 15 minutes. That in Roots, we are trying to go forward with a vision of peace and justice in the Holy Land that maintains this balance of universality and particularity as the formula for a successful, prosperous future for Israelis and Palestinians in the Holy Land. Why do I say that? Because on the one hand, Roots is not like other peace groups that say we're all the same. Jews, Christians, Muslims, it's really, they're all saying the same thing. And those distinctions are really not important. The most important thing is that we're human beings. We all just have to get along. Let's create one state from the Jordan to the Mediterranean that everyone's the same. It's a secular, universalistic understanding and formula. Many people say that, and I understand it. And I actually have a deep pull in my heart for it. But in Roots, we say it won't work. It won't work. Because the people of the Middle East, the people of Israel, Palestine, do have different identities. There's Palestinians and there's Israelis, they're different. There's Jews, there's Muslims, there's Christians, and they're different. And we in Roots believe that we have to respect, honor, cherish, accept, legitimize, and recognize the particular identities of both sides. That I, as a Jew, recognize, love, and cherish my identity, my story, but that doesn't mean that the other side's story is wrong or illegitimate. The other side also has a story, and that story is no less legitimate in this land than my story. I have to expand my identity, as I often say, to see myself not just as a Jew, but also as someone with great respect for Islam and Christianity, for Palestinian nationalism. That's part of the formula that's going to make peace work. And that's one of the reasons why Roots says that religious people, traditional people, people on the right wing, they have to be part of the movement towards peace. You can't just sweep them under the rug. You can't just ignore them or marginalize them, because they're going to come back with a vengeance. So they'll come back and tell you, if you make a peace that's just universal, we're going to blow it up in your faces, which is what happened after Oslo. The Muslims blew it up, the radical Muslims and the radical Jews blew it up, whether it's the settlers on the Jewish side or Hamas on the Palestinian side. They both said you didn't recognize our identity. You just went with the universalism, with the brotherhood, with all the same, with the secular universalism. No, you have to hear our voices. So those voices are real. We have to accept them. I believe not only they're real, we have to accept them. I also believe that they're beautiful, that there's deep meaning there. So we need the particularism, but we also need universality. We can't just say that there's Jews and Muslims and Christians, there's Palestinians and Israelis, and they're all totally different. There's no connection between them. If you only have particularisms, we'll also never make peace. We also have to find a commonality. We also have to find that we all are human beings. There is some common denominator that brings us together at the same time that we're also different. What happens usually in Israel and Palestine today, I'll talk on the Israeli side, there are Israelis for peace, and they're the universalists. And then there's Israelis for Jewish identity and Jewish particularism, and they're against peace. You have the particularists here, you have the universalists here, but neither of them are going to bring us to peace, because the universalists don't recognize particular identities of the particularists, and the particularists don't recognize any universality. To make peace, we need both poles. We need both sides. We need that sense of human brotherhood, the sense that we're all the same. We all should respect and accept each other on that human level. But we also need to respect the particularity that the peace we're going to make has to be based on the differences between the two peoples, respective of their own separate identities. I have more or less finished my my soapbox. And now we have almost 15 minutes for objections and comments and a discussion. So feel free to unmute yourselves.
I'm just remembering W.E.B. Du Bois saying over a century ago that the problem of the 20th century will be the problem of the color line. Unfortunately, the 20th century has come and gone, and we've gotten no closer to resolving it.
It was also interesting when you were talking about the discussions and acceptances and all that, that I believe someplace back in my history, I had heard that according to Jewish tradition, the purpose of a debate is not to change the other person's mind, but rather to show them where you are coming from. It's more an educational thing than a convincing thing. And I was with you all the way up until you did use the term accept the other side. And then it was like, right up till then I was with you.
What you say has a lot to unpack. Indeed, in Jewish tradition, we have a sense of multiple truths, that you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. There can be 3 and 4 and 5 truths. And that's indeed why I said that as a Jew, I also have to accept the truth, the legitimacy in Christianity, in Islam, in Palestinian nationalism.
Except that that is their belief. I misinterpreted you. I thought you meant accept it as now part of my belief. And that's where you lost me. But yeah, accept that is their absolute right to their belief.
Again, there's a nuance here. Again, I'm saying that I as a Jew have to accept, and I'll use Rabbi Sachs's words, my story is not the only story. The Palestinian story is a real story. It's a legitimate story. The Christian story is a real story, legitimate story. The Muslim story is a real story, a legitimate story. When I say that in my belief, God made a covenant of love with the Jewish people, that doesn't mean that there aren't other covenants of love between God and other peoples. I think that is the fullness of what we're talking about here today. And I understand that a lot of people have trouble with that type of full acceptance of legitimacy of other peoples, other beliefs, other stories. It's hard to understand and believe that my story is my story and it's important to me and it's true, but that doesn't make your story less true. That's hard. But that's exactly the struggle that we have to, I think, overcome to make peace. And to flesh it out a little bit, you could make peace in a different fashion by saying that no one's story is true. The Muslim story is not true, and the Jewish story isn't true, and the Christian and the Zionist, they're not important. What's important is all human beings. We're all the same. We've tried to make peace like that. Again, that was Oslo, and it didn't work. Because again, it ignores the particularities. I believe we have to make peace from the particularities. We have to involve in peace, again, the religious Jews. But when you make peace from the particularities, it means you have to accept not just that your particularity is true, but the other person's particularity is also true. And that's hard for the people who believe in particularity. That's the challenge, in my belief.
One thing that I realized when you were talking earlier is that, and I don't know that I thought about it correctly, but the words that came to my mind were, all wars are wars for universalism. I want to impose my universal truth on you. Now, that's certainly not true about all wars. There are a lot of other reasons, but it did put a little light bulb off above my head.
So I'll tell you that Rabbi Sachs, in the same book, he calls what you're referring to altruistic evil.
Oh.
Altruistic evil. When I do evil for the sake of my love of God, the sake of bring good to the world. I mean, what is, in Hebrew we call it Daesh. In English you call it, I think, Al-Qaeda. right? The Muslim fundamentalist movements of that were very, very much central in our consciousness 5 years ago and 10 years ago, they did evil, but they did it for God's sake. They did it to bring truth to the world. They really believed that they were doing good. The same thing happened in the 100 Years' War back in Europe hundreds of years ago. They were fighting for truth between Protestants and Catholics. They were doing evil for God's sake. And it is possible to do evil for God's sake. And the claim I'm making is that you can try to overcome that by just eliminating truth at all, eliminating particularity. But that's probably not going to work. The suggestion is to stay with particularity, but at the same time, to also see that the other side's particularity also has legitimacy, and to also see that we're all part of a human family. And we're all part of a human family. I'm not going to kill you to make you believe what I believe, because you're my brother. Again, open to discussion. I'm happy to hear.
So what you're saying, Rav, is that in a sense, all our feuds are family feuds, because even within a family, there can be profound differences of perspective.
Within a family,
so within the human family, we are having lots of family feuds.
And if we really understood ourselves as family, perhaps we wouldn't kill in order to prove our point, right?
Yeah.
Carol.
My question is this. I believe everything that you're saying. I love the duality concept. I have tremendous respect for all peoples. But when we're talking about the land and occupation and who owns the land, I don't know how you can find peace. Can you help me on that?
To make a long story short, I believe that if all of us Jews would really accept the things we talked about here, then we wouldn't be engaging in the occupation today in the way that we are.
Okay.
We wouldn't be creating injustice and suffering. We wouldn't be living our story at the expense of the Palestinian story if we really accepted the things that Rabbi Sachs claims are part of Judaism.
Okay.
Clearly, the people who are perpetrating injustice today in the name of Judaism, they believe in a different Judaism than what Rabbi Sachs believes in.
Thank you.
Clearly, right? There's no other way but to say that. And that's why, by the way, in Roots we believe that this conflict, in order to be solved, not only does it require the input of religious people on both sides, it also requires a rethinking of our religious traditions. Because if on the Jewish side, you have people who only believe in particularism and not in universalism, and if on the Muslim side, you only have people that believe in particularism, not universalism, then we'll keep killing each other. We have to bring forth in our religious traditions the things we talked about in the session. And what I'm actually saying is that the dual Jewish understanding of two identities, that we're both human beings and we're Jews, the dual Jewish understanding of Rosh Hashana, that there are two New Years symbolizing two foci of identity, I'm claiming that is necessary for peace. That's necessary for peace.
Thank you.
And perhaps we'll end with the following. Most Jews have heard of the most famous Jewish prayer, the most famous Jewish statement, which is Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, which means, hear, O Israel, that's the first part. God is our God, that's the second part. Third part, God is one. It's three parts. Listen, Israel, listen, all Jews. Second part, God is our God. Number three, God is one. Believe it or not, one of the central major traditional interpretations of what I just said, that prayer, summarizes everything we just said for the past hour and a half. Shema Yisrael is listen, all Jews, to the following truth. And what's the truth? The truth is that there are two truths. That God is our God, and God is also one. That's the particularism, and then the universality. God is our God. God is the God of the Jewish people. God is our particular God. There's a particular covenant, a particular Jewish truth. Yes, that's true, but it doesn't end there. God is also one, which means God is the God of everyone. There's only one. There's not two or three or four. There's only one God, which means he's the universal God, which means that he's the God of all humanity, which means that whenever a Jew says that prayer, he's saying, I believe in that dual identity, that dual understanding, that God is both the God of the universe, the universal God, that all human beings are brothers, we're all together in this together, and at the same time, there's also a particular Jewish understanding, a particular Jewish covenant. And you have to hold in your mind and your heart and identity that duality. It's found in Shema Yisrael. It's found in the idea of two Rosh Hashanahs, two beginnings of the year, in the fall and in the spring. And I believe that it's really the foundation of making peace between Israelis and Jews on the one hand, and Palestinians and Christians and Muslims on the other hand. Thank you everyone for joining us. Remember, next week is the story of the Jew, the Christian in the belly of the whale, the book of Jonah. And right before next week, right before our session, is the first annual Roots Run for Reconciliation. So look in the chat and see there the link. I just put it there again. And support us by running where you are, and especially by going to the link to the crowdfunding page and donate what you can for the success and prosperity of Roots, trying to bring a little bit of hope and human bridges of understanding between Palestinians and Israelis.
Rabbi, am I correct that after next week, there'll be a 4-week break?
I don't remember, it's 3 week or 4 week, but there'll be a break. You're right, thank you for saying that. But everyone, thanks for doing this.
This was
Yeah.
an outstanding session.
Thank you. Amazing
dreadful.
session.
Yes.
If anyone wants to
Truly
stay afterwards,
pathetic.
I'll answer any questions after other people leave. I'm willing to stay.
Good.
Great class, thank you. Very, very interesting.
Utterly uninteresting and utterly stupid.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there aren't people on other sides, like philosophers in the Islamic world or the Palestinian side of the Islamic world, who take this kind of philosophy in their own faith as well. That I mean, it's wonderful to have people like you and Jonathan Sachs who feel this way, but are there spokespeople on the other side, in other faiths that feel this way too, that we can be in conversation with, and who can persuade their own groups of followers to come along into this idea?
I think the answer is yes, because I know from my Palestinian partners, from our Muslim partners, that that's the way they understand. It's not the same thing, of course, there's differences, Some of the Palestinian partners believe that things of the sort we're talking about are pretty explicit in the Quran. Pretty explicit in the Quran. Of course, other Muslims don't agree with those interpretations. We have our inter-religious differences, both among Jews and Muslim and Christians, of course. Yeah.
There's a group, there's a Muslim, there's a Muslim, I was going to say there's a Muslim sect called Ahmadiyya, who are not all Muslims consider them Muslims because they follow not only Muhammad but another prophet by the name of Ahmed, who do a lot of outreach and seek to inform other cultures, other religions about one another, and to look for and to make conferences to teach people about different ways of understanding the nature of God.
Yeah, we've had some connection with them. They have a large group in the city of Haifa, and they have a smaller group in the city of Hebron.
The Hamas.
And people from the Hebron group and from the Haifa group have come to visit our root center in Gush Etzion, so we've heard a little bit about them. Yeah. I see Ruth has her electronic hand up, and she's driving.
Yes, I was, but no, actually I was going to pull over. That's why I was driving, I was walking, but now I'm pulling over, so you don't have to worry. I was thinking about the question of universalism, and that there are Jews who consider themselves universalists, but basically their interpretation seems to be, we can do the Jewish thing in Eretz Israel, and then the world will find, and we're universalists because we believe in world peace. And I think that Rav Kook, the first Rav Kook, wrote something like that. And even the followers of his son might believe that they're universalists. And even about the facts, not to be, I don't want to malign him because I don't know all the facts, but I believe that he doesn't seem to be troubled by the settlement or by some of Israel's policy, and yet he sees himself as a universalist. So how do you distinguish this view from any of those people? Or not naming names, but how can you be, that's just, I don't know what the specific question is, but that's the thing that bothered me about the distinction that you were setting up.
I'm thinking of what to say. So there's two parts to it. One is simply more of a sociological matter, which is that in my understanding, there's a great gap between the writings of Rabbi Kook, the father, and Rabbi Kook, the son. Rabbi Kook, the father, although he did very much emphasize the particularity of the Jewish people, he also very much emphasized the universality part. And he talked about his respect for other religions very explicitly, for example. Whereas Rabbi Kook, the son, has a lot, seems to many people, not just me, to have emphasized the particular and jettisoned the universal. But that's a sociological matter.
Rabbi Kook, yeah.
But then to talk more to the substance of things.
Sorry, go ahead, finish.
To the substance of things, the second matter. Yeah, I can see a philosophy that says, I believe in the humanity of man and human brotherhood, but the land of Israel is ours. That's our particular covenant, and no one else could live here. I theoretically get that. But it seems to me to not have absorbed into the heart the full humanity of the other. If you really, in the deepest sense, see the divine image in the other, I don't see how you can kill him to drive him out of your land.
Or even if not kill him, but
I don't
less
see
than
how
kill
you
him,
can, I don't see how you can make his life miserable.
I've mentioned this before. We have the Torah implies, and the Talmud, I believe, explicitly states that if God is displeased with us, he will kick us out of the land, but won't let anybody else live there, that the land will be empty and desolate. And the history is that, no, that never happened.
Yeah, right. Part of...
And yet they say it did happen. Seriously, contemporary Orthodox rabbis who are well respected and considered modern, I've seen articles that say basically it was, and they ignore evidence to the contrary.
So Ruth, I have to say something in general that I think will help deal with what you're bringing up, which is that I'm fully aware that my understanding of Judaism is not the only understanding. I'm fully aware that many, many rabbis who are better and greater and more learned than me disagree with me terribly. I'm fully aware that as much as I love and respect Rabbi Sachs, he's in the minority.
But even Rabbi Sachs, he did not, I believe his writings about Israel that I've seen do not fully address the issues that you seem to be that you are addressing and that you have addressed over the past, 5 years.
Okay, so that I don't know. You could be right. I haven't read all his writings. From the little I've read, I get the impression that he would be a supporter of Roots, but I could be wrong. So look, there is a battle of ideas going on here, and I'm advocating for ideas that are in the minority. I know that. I admit that. And I don't say my Judaism is the only Judaism. There are other Judaisms, other understandings. I have to admit that. And I also have to admit that were myself and the other rabbis you're talking about to have an argument, they might win the argument. They might have more proofs than I have.
They might have more sources to quote, or they may be more learned, but you may have more understanding, which I think you do.
Let me add one other thing, which is that my understanding absolutely does not sprout only from the text. My understanding sprouts from my human interaction with Palestinians.
Right.
My experience colors my reading of the text because I've met human beings and I can't read my text in a fashion that contradicts my experience. And I admit that.
And I think that the text might say when it's compared to the realities and the human beings. Oh.
Try it again.
I think it's possible to look at text to say you must be willing to address the reality of it and confront, real life impacts. I think the rabbis in the Talmud, they look to see what that situation was on the ground when they made decisions. I think that many contemporary rabbis don't look to see the actual situation on the ground in the way that you have in the past 5 or 6 years.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
And indeed, therefore, in Roots we say, or at least I would say, you can't just read the text. You have to read the people. You have to meet the people. You have to get out of the study hall and get out of your segregated communities and meet the people. Because there's lots of Jews, just like there's lots of Muslims, even though they say, I believe that everyone's a human being, they don't really know what that means because they haven't met them. They haven't interacted with them.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I guess I will say to you, I was in some conversation.
It's cut off.
You
didn't hear what she's saying?
Oh, I'll write that to you. But anyhow, because I am in a place where the Wi-Fi is not so good where I am. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone else want to make a comment? I guess not.
So,
yeah.
Can I follow up on something? So I don't know how to say, this may be, I don't know if you have time to respond to it because I know it's already late over there, but I'll just share and then maybe in the future we can discuss more. But so I really appreciated what you said about, you know, universalism, particularism, and sort of what the motivation there is, and a part of why what God may be doing with that. But I feel like there's something left that wasn't addressed, and I could be wrong. I may misunderstand the way Judaism or parts of Judaism understand these concepts. But my understanding is that Judaism is, or that, you know, Jewish tradition is not just believed that the Jews have a special covenant, or God made a special covenant with the Jewish people, and then there may be other covenants that he made with other people, but that God chose the Jewish people as a special treasure for himself in a way that he chose nobody else for specific reasons. And so not necessarily that the Jewish people are better humans than anyone else, but God had something very specific and I guess just special for them, and that maybe to say he's revealed himself to them in a way that he hasn't to anyone else. And so I feel like if I'm right about that, and I may be wrong, in which case correct me, but if I'm right about that, I feel like your answer didn't quite address that part of it. So and that's, I mean, I really appreciate what you said. It made a lot of sense, but I feel like there's something left to be addressed as well. So
the fact that there's a Jewish covenant and then there's a universal covenant with all of humanity, those two covenants, that's a fact of Jewish theology that no one argues with. But then you pointed out that according to much of Jewish thought, the Jewish covenant is special, the Jewish people are a treasure, they're chosen, and that means that God chose no one else in the same way that he chose the Jewish people. And what you said is, I think, what most Jewish thinkers have thought for all the generations. But even if we say that, when you say that it has chosen the Jewish people in a fashion that God chose no one else, okay, but God may have chosen other peoples in different fashions. In other words, even the medieval thinkers said, for example, that Christianity is part of God's plan. Clearly, they said there's a Jewish covenant that should be the chosen people, but God chose the Christian people for the Christian religion for a certain role. That's explicit. There is, even if you believe that the Jewish people have a special covenant with God that doesn't believe, that doesn't mean that there aren't other people that are chosen for other things. That's point number one. Point number two is that there is a minority of Jewish thinkers who say explicitly what I'm saying. Not just that there are hints there and there that God chose other people for other things, but say explicitly that that there's prophets for the Christians and prophets for the Muslims, and they're real prophets, and they really speak God's word. And in modern times, that's been developed into a type of thinking that the Jewish people are special, but other people is also special. Each is special in its own way. And so when I say that there are different covenants and there are prophets in each religion and there's truth in each religion, and each people or religion may be chosen for its own path, its own unique contribution, I am on the edge of Jewish theology, but it's there. It's absolutely there. I'm just bringing it to the fore, and I'm emphasizing it. There's so much in Jewish theology. There are so many strands and directions, and I'm taking one direction and I'm developing it. But I'm not, at least I believe, I'm not outside of the boundaries of Jewish theology. I can give you many thinkers that I'm based upon. Not a lot, not lots and lots, but many.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. I don't know, you're muted. Judy, you're muted.
There, I got it. I pushed the wrong button and the chat thing came up. At the very beginning, you mentioned 7 universal commandments.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could say them again slowly, so I can actually have time to write them down, because I can't write as fast as
The
you can talk.
prohibition against idolatry is number 1.
Yeah, I got that.
Idolatry. Number 2, the prohibition against murder.
Yeah, I had that.
Number 2, the prohibition against sexual crimes that include rape and adultery.
Okay.
Number 4, theft, the prohibition against theft.
Yep.
Number 5, the prohibition against blasphemy. Number 6, the prohibition against cruelty to animals.
Okay.
And number 7, the commandment to live in a society that has a legal system, that has laws, that has police and has courts.
Police, laws, and
court.
court. Got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, this is just an aside, but it's interesting that number 6 did not make it into the 10 Commandments.
Number 6 didn't make it into 10 commandments, but in Jewish law, all Jews are obligated in those 7 commandments. So it doesn't have to be in the 10 commandments. It's in the 7 commandments.
So I'm going to sign off, but this was great. Thank you so much. I really appreciated listening.
I'm going to sign off
Take care,
also.
everyone.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Bye,
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you so much. You're becoming my rabbi.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna read all the chats that people wrote. It's about when I sign off, I lose them. Wow, there's so many.
Right. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
For nothing.
Have a good week.
Shavua tov.
Shavua tov, shavua tov. Di-da-di. Is it okay to ask something, to share something?
Yeah.
Okay, because I know you were reading. I just wanted to tell you that the other day I started writing about my interpretation of Adonai Echad. And what I said is that it could be read as one God, or it could be read as God is oneness. And I think that's exactly what you were saying. It's just a little bit different wording. And I said that it's oneness. It means that it's everywhere, everything, everyone. And so it just felt so beautiful to hear you say what you said. I felt, because I just hope people will get there, you know, to that space. And that idea of, you know, 2 states and then a confederation of some kind, I think really does so much reflect exactly what you've been saying this whole day, because it addresses the particular and the universal. And it's true. It's, I'm just love, and you know, I am not a religious person. I grew up in a totally atheist home, and I guess I don't quite know what religious could mean, but it's so interesting to me that you, an Orthodox rabbi, are the one that is really reaching me. I just wanted to tell you, because anyway, it's very moving.
Thank you very
So
much. Thanks for sharing that.
And I'm crying. I am. I'm crying. It's really, really moving. And I've got, I'm always telling people that I do really do the including my story, somebody else's story, whether it's Palestinian or German or religion or whatever. And I've been doing all sorts of work and bringing these groups to speak. And I keep trying for Roots, I told you, but I don't even know what I was going to say, but I'm just feeling this coming more from Roots in your presentations than I am from any other of the groups that I've been involved with. And I've been involved with, I'm sure you know, the alphabet soup of them, I've been bringing people to speak here and stuff from so many